How's it going? This is Dan from modular.dev. Starting a new series today. In the past, I've been doing a little bit more advanced type of topics, dealing with Blazor and things that are just kind of coming out with native file stream and things like that. But today, I'm going to dial it back a bit. We're going to start right from the beginning, learning HTML and how the web works and how you can make your own web pages. So if you're an absolute beginner, this is definitely a good place to start for you. And as always, feel free to reach out in the comments, either during the live stream or afterwards if you have any questions. So I guess let's first talk about how the web works. When the browser, so this is the web browser, right? I'm in Google Chrome. When Google Chrome says, okay, give me the website at this address, you type in an address, you hit enter, and it goes there. What exactly happens? Let's take a quick look. So you can right-click if you're in Google Chrome or Microsoft Edge. You can right-click and go to Inspect, and that'll open up this panel over here. You can go to the Network tab to see everything that's going on. And I'll just hit refresh and show you exactly what's happening when we load this web page. So if you look here, we downloaded a whole bunch of stuff. The very first thing was this thing called HTML, and it has a type of document. So this is actually the thing that you get when you go to this this web page right here. And if we look at that, it's actually just a big text file with a whole bunch of things in it. The browser then looks at all of that text and decides what else it needs to get. So it may see some fonts or some images that it needs to grab, and it goes out and gets those. So that's what you're seeing over here, all these other requests. When it gets all of those things, it kind of puts them together and kind of draws it out on your screen. So you'll see this text here, maybe. This text here, if I look at it, you can look at anything on a website by right-clicking and saying inspect. So if I look at that here, that's inside of all these tags here, but basically it's right here inside this span tag. And I'll teach you about tags in just a little bit and how HTML is structured, but this is at a very basic level how it works. The browser requests a resource, it gets it back, and it tells the browser how to display that resource. Here's another example. This is a website that I did. Platform Web Solutions. This is my sister company, I guess you could call it. Let's look at the network tab again. We'll hit refresh. And you can see we loaded a whole bunch of things, but this first one was www.platformwebsolutions.com. And if we look at the response by clicking it and going to the response, we'll see that there's a whole bunch of text part of this document. And that's really all it is. So where do you get this text? How do you actually get it? Normally what happens is you have a web server, which is nothing more than a computer, but you have a computer that's hooked up to a domain. So basically, in this case, platformwebsolutions.com, I tell my web host to go to my web server, and my web server says, okay, you want this website? Here you go. And it can be nothing more than an HTML file, which we'll learn about in just a second. But at the very basic level, this is how the browser requests a resource, the server responds to the resource, and you get a response back. And this is what you can see here in the network tab. So again, you're going to be able to see these things by right-clicking and going to inspect, and going to the network tab. I think it's F12 as well, if you're on Windows anyways. So I guess let's move on. That's basically how that works. So what is an HTML file, and how do we write one? So the first thing I would do is I would download a tool called Visual Studio Code. You don't necessarily need Visual Studio Code. You could write your HTML file in Notepad or something like that. But Visual Studio Code is meant for this type of thing. So that's what I use. So if you're on Windows, just go ahead and click the download button. Or if you're on Linux or Mac, it should work for you as well. I've already downloaded it, so let's bring it up. And this is kind of what you see when you first get here. I'll close this out. But basically what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to create a folder for your workspace. So you may want to have a couple different HTML files in that folder. So let's go ahead and just say File, and we'll say Open Folder. I've already created a folder for this, but I'm going to delete it just so we start from fresh. And in here, I'm just going to create a new folder. Now, if you had already created a folder, you could just use it. But there we go. I'll select that, and I'll hit Select Folder. So now we're in that folder. Again, I'm going to just close this down. And we can go ahead and create any kind of documents that we want in this folder by clicking this New File icon right here. So I'm going to click that, and I'm going to create a file called index.html. By default, on the web, index is kind of the main homepage one. If you're using static HTML pages, which we are in this case, index.html is going to be the main one that you use. So if you noticed, I named it .html. This is going to be an HTML file. So whenever you're creating an HTML file, there's a few things you have to do. And we'll just kind of do it here the first time, but normally I kind of just copy and paste after that. But the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to put in the doc type. And Visual Studio Code kind of recommended this to me, and this is the correct doc type. And that just tells the browser, you know, Google Chrome or whoever, it tells them, okay, this is an HTML document. Theoretically, we could have an image with a .html. It wouldn't be correct. So this is how the browser knows for sure that it's an HTML document. Could you get away without it? Maybe, but don't do it. The second thing is you actually need to put an HTML tag. And these tags, you're going to see them all over the place when you get into HTML. And they always start like this. They have a tag, and then they have an end tag. And it's basically the same thing, except for there's this slash in front of the end tag. So in this case, I've got an open HTML and a close HTML. And everything that I want to put inside of this is going to go between these two tags. And that's going to be how pretty much all of the tags in HTML work. You're going to start with an open one and end with a closed one. There's a few exceptions, but for the most part, that's how it works. And then, so inside HTML, we have two things. We have a head tag, and we have a body tag. And this is how it's going to be. Hi, Smiley Club. Good to see you here. And this is how it's going to be whenever you're writing any kind of HTML document. And that goes for any website on the web. If I bring that back up, and you can see here, and I look at maybe the source, you'll see HTML, head, body, exactly like we just did. Same thing if I go over to Visual Studio Code and look at that code, you're going to see HTML, head, body. So those things are standard. You definitely will need those in your document. So what are they? The head tag goes for anything that the browser needs to know about your HTML page. So if you need to put, let's say, a title here, hello, welcome to HTML. What is going to happen with this title? This is a title tag. And right now, that title that title corresponds to what you see in the top part of the tab here. So in this case, this title was Plava Web Solutions. In this case, this title was Download Visual Studio Code. And we can look at that by going into the head tag, just like we were writing in Visual Studio. And they've got a whole bunch of things, but let's see if we can find it. Here it is. Title, Download Visual Studio Code, Mac, Linux, Windows. So this is what every HTML file is going to use, whether or not you're a big company or small. Just starting out learning HTML. That's what you're going to use. Let me bring Visual Studio back up. All right. So you can put something like the title in your head. You can put something like your favicon in there, which the favicon is this little icon that you're going to see up here in the top left of each tab. So basically anything that the browser is going to need to know as far as displaying, metadata about your site is going to go in this head portion. It's good to know that anything in this head portion is not going to be displayed down here in the body part of the document. That's for the body tag. So everything in the body tag will go actually on the website itself. So let's go ahead and just put something here so we can see it render out. We'll just put hello. Well, hello world. Okay. We have our document. How do we actually view it? There's a couple different ways. We can find it in our File Explorer. So if we open it up in our File Explorer, we can just double click it. And I'll just say open it up in Chrome. And there it is. So that's one way of doing it. If you're in Visual Studio Code, there's a slightly easier way of doing it though. You can hit run and then run without debugging. And that's going to ask you how do you want to do it. And I usually just choose Chrome preview here. And that's just going to open it up. So I've opened it up on the left side here. And I'm just going to keep that open just so we can see all of our changes as we go. So this over here is the website, and this over here is my code. So if you notice, if I change this text from hello world to hello worlds, and I hit refresh, we'll see the change. And also, you may have already seen that in the top left, it says, hello, welcome to HTML. And that's because that's what we put as our title here. So that's how the title works, and that's how you can get something displayed on the body of your HTML page. But normally you don't just stick text right in the body like this. You want to organize it a little bit. So this is where other HTML tags come in. So one that will start off right away is the H1 tag, and that means header 1. There's also header 2, header 3, all the way down to 6. And what these are they're going to be the headers for your page. And when I talk about headers, let's bring this up. When we look at headers, I would assume that this is a header. Download Visual Studio Code, because it is kind of the main text of this page. A lot of times you can think of it as if you were maybe somebody that needed a screen reader because maybe you couldn't see the screen, maybe you're blind, or have other vision problems. If you are not able to see the screen, how are you going to know what the most important text is on the screen? And that's where headers come in, because that helps guide you down the page. Another way to think about it maybe would be if you are a robot, a web crawler, maybe Google, or maybe you're trying to figure out what each part of the web page means. the header tag is going to say, okay, this is the most important part in this kind of section here. So we'll see if we're right. Let's just right click this, inspect, and you can do this on anything. You can right click anything and say inspect, and that'll open up the dev tools, and you'll see where we're at. So it looks like we were right. This was an H1. So this is the most important header on the page. So let's go ahead and put something in here. We'll put hello world here as our header, and let's refresh this. And you'll notice by default the text now is much bigger and much bolder than it was before. And that's because by default headers are intended to be bigger and bolder. If we were to do the same exact thing in a paragraph tag, which is this P tag here, I'm a paragraph, let's just put that. You'll notice by default it's much smaller and not as bold. So that's intended. That's how it's supposed to be. So if you want to change that, I'll show you how in just a bit. But just know that there are different defaults that the browser will show you, or that the browser will use. That because most people are going to want that, right? Most people are going to want bigger header, a bolder header than they would the paragraph. So we've seen the H1, the H2, the H3, the H4, the H5, the H6. Those are the different headers. So when might you want to use H2? You would want to use that for a smaller, not as important header. Not as important. And by default, again, it's going to be a little bit smaller than the H1. So if we look at, let's go back to maybe here. This is a good website. We've got a whole bunch of different areas of the page. This right here, I'm guessing, is an H1. Let's see. Yep, this is an H1. This is the most important header on the page. But what other headers might we have? This one here might be a header. Let's see. Okay, no, this one was not a header. This one was just a span. Let's try another one. This one is probably a header. Yes, this is an H2. So you can see how in this website they used H1 as the main one, and they used H2 here, and they probably also have H2 here. Yeah. If there's any smaller like areas inside this H2, that area would probably use H3. For example, this link here maybe is an H3, maybe, no, it's just a link. That's fine. But they maybe could have used an H3 there if they wanted to. But yeah, that's how headers work. So let's go ahead and delete this. I don't want to throw too many HTML tags at you right away because it can get confusing. But if you ever want to look up the different HTML tags, I put the link in the description of this video. I would just go to developer.mozilla.org and then choose your language, I guess, and /docs/web/HTML. And you're going to see here they have a whole bunch of HTML elements. If you expand this out, and we'll scroll down a little bit, there's this H1 that we were talking about, and the paragraph tag right here that we were talking about. And we'll go over a lot more of these, probably not this time, but in the next video. Alright, let's move on. So how do we make things look different? Because right now we have this H1 and we have this paragraph. What if we wanted this paragraph to be blue text instead of black, for instance? How could you do that? Well, there's 3 parts to a website. There's the HTML. I mean, there's more than 3 parts, but generalizing here. There's the HTML, which tells the browser what to display. There's the CSS, which tells the browser how to display it. And then there's JavaScript, which is going to do things that just HTML alone can't do, like displaying a graph or like an interactive chart or something like that. Anytime you want a little bit more interactivity, a lot of times you have to use JavaScript. But for the most part, this video series that I'm going to be doing is going to be based on HTML and CSS. We're not going to touch JavaScript hardly at all. So with that being said, let's go ahead and talk about CSS. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets, and what that is we can apply styling to an element. So this element here is an H1 element, and we can apply a style to it. So what we can do is we can say style right here inside this HTML element, or this H1 element, sorry. And we can say color blue. And color is going to be the text color. If I refresh this, now you can see we have blue text. There's a whole bunch of different things we can do. We could change the, let's see, I'm going to put this on a different line so we're not getting too large here. We can change the font size to, let's say 18 pixels. That's going to make it quite a bit smaller. So we're changing how it looks, but we're not actually changing the meaning of it. This is still the H1, the header, the main header for the page. And that's an important distinction. Prior to HTML5, a lot of times people would style their web page would be based on, or the tags they would use would be based off the style they wanted. So if they wanted a large font, they might use a header tag even though it's not a header. Nowadays, you definitely want to use CSS to style your tags and use the right tags that would be for, you know, like I said earlier, maybe somebody that had to use a screen reader or something like that. So enough about that. Let's just keep moving on. So we have the style here. We can put the style right in the H1 tag itself. But if we have multiple, well, you shouldn't have multiple H1 tags, but let's just say we do. Now I have to copy this style for each one. And that's kind of a lot of code to do that when we have to have the same style for each one. If we wanted to have a more generic style, we could put the style up here in the head section. And it doesn't have to be in the head section. It can be, you know, in the body or whatever too. But a lot of times you will see it up here. So in here we can just type H1 and give it a style with these curly brackets. So I would say color blue, font size 18 pixels. And now I can get rid of all of these. Whoops. Okay, I'll just delete those and throw in a couple more. And if that worked correctly, we should see them looking exactly the same. And we do. Let's go ahead and make these green. So by styling it up here, we're actually able to style everything in the whole document, which is awesome. We could do the same thing for a paragraph. So we use the same tag name as we use down here. So let's say we want to make this font size 36 pixels, and maybe we want it to be bold. Bold, you can do font weight, and then you can give it a weight. 700 is bold. Otherwise, you can just type out bold as well, but I usually use the number. And now our paragraph tag is suddenly bigger and bolder than our header tag. And if that's what your website calls for, that's perfectly fine. But let's get things a little bit put in order here. Let's go ahead and change this to 36 pixels. Put this back to black. We'll put this down to 18 and a font weight of 400. Okay, that's pretty close to what it was when we started. So that is basically how you're going to do your styling, and that's how you're going to create different tags. Now, there is one other thing that I should show, and that is you can actually put these styles into a separate file if you want, if you don't want them taking up space in your HTML document, or if the styles are getting very large, you probably do want to put them in a different file. In fact, almost always you should. So let's go ahead and do that. Style.css, and you can call it whatever you want, but it has to end with .css. And I'm just going to take everything that was inside this style tag and move it out to this file. And now we can get rid of this style tag. That in and of itself won't work though if I refresh. You may have seen it change back to its original style there. I'm going to make this maybe red or something just so it's a little bit more obvious. If this was working, our header would be red here, but it's not. So what we have to do is we have to add a link to this, because there's no way of knowing that we want to use this separate file inside our HTML document. So what we can do is we can say link href equals style.css, and we'll do a type of style sheet. Okay, that did not work. I must have some very. Let me just see what's going on here. If I look at this, oh, it's not type equals style sheet, it's rel equals style sheet. That's right. Okay. Like I say, normally I just copy and paste this because I'm just so used to it. So there we go. So now we're referencing our CSS file. We're seeing the red text. So this was a lot to go over, but basically, what did we go over? We went over how a browser asks for a file. In this case, the browser is asking for this index.html, and we send back some HTML for it. Let's expand this out. In this case, we sent back this index.html, which looks like this. Now the browser is going to take this and it's going to figure out how it should display that on the screen. And it's going to see this h1 tag, and it's going to see this paragraph tag. And it's going to say, okay, does this h1 tag have any styles? And it's going to see that it does from our style.css. And it's going to apply those styles along with its other default styles to show the h1 tag. Then it's going to go down to the paragraph tag, and it's going to say, okay, is there any styles for this paragraph? And it's going to say, yes, there is. There's a font size of 18 pixels and a font weight of 400. And it's going to apply those styles to the paragraph tag. Now, one more thing I just want to point out is the default styles. So if I right click this, I can see the default browser styles right here on the styles tab, where it says user agent style sheet. This is the default browser thing. So you may not know what these are yet, and that's perfectly fine. We haven't gone over them, but these are the default styles. Now we can override that if we want, but right now we won't. Same thing for this h1 tag. It has its own default styles. And you see here, we actually did override one of them. By default, it was 2em, which em is basically em stands for, okay, what is my normal font size? This one should be twice as big. That's what 2em stands for. And we overrode that with 36 pixels. And that's why you see it's crossed out there. But everything else we did not change, which means that that's being used. So if you're ever wondering about browser defaults, just go ahead and check the user agent style sheet down here. You can also go to computed, which will show you all of the styles and where they came from. So if I look at font size, I can expand this out and see that my style sheet gave it 36 pixels and the default one gave it 2 EM. But since mine is on the top, it overrode it. So I know there's a lot to go over for this first one. So definitely reach out if you have any questions. And next time we'll get into a little bit more about how to maybe add images to the website and how to style them appropriately. So I hope you enjoyed this, and definitely reach out if you have any questions or comments. Thanks for watching.